Hi, welcome to another episode of Zelf on the Shelf. I'm Tanner.
I'm Sam.
We tried to step away from Mormonism for like 2 seconds, but it's a pioneer train wreck, a train trek you can hardly look away from. The Mormon verse has exploded. The Utah grifter industrial complex is all at each other's throats right now. I can't believe it. We're here to talk about it.
We've got discord within the in-group. The Mormon Church came out and condemned Tim Ballard, which, surprising. You know they know some shit when they're condemning someone for trying to protect children, because they normally don't like to step in.
So for background, Tim Ballard is the founder and initial CEO of Operation Underground Railroad, which has been in operation for over a decade, which purports to rescue child sex slaves from traffickers. The problem is that Tim has grossly exaggerated the statistics surrounding trafficking in order to feed into the moral panic, which then feeds into the donation train.
Which then also a lot of times inadvertently has people pushing for the wrong kind of solutions to the problem.
Exactly.
Especially politically, we've seen it demonize sex work more and make life more unsafe for certain people. Oh my God, there's so many things.
Yeah, that's just one of many allegations, now new allegations which have been rumored for some time, that Tim was using his his raids, as an attempt to groom women under the pretense of, how far are you willing to go?
A Mormon man would never use his position of influence to groom women. That's preposterous. Also, as we talked about in our last video, we did 2 other episodes on this. It was one video split into 2, but tons of experts have come out about OUR and their methods, and Tim Ballard, including, for example, the leading international expert on human trafficking law, who wrote a piece criticizing some of OUR's methods. Tim called her a bitch.
Yeah, that was his
very cool.
Intelligent retort.
We love a feminist crusader for women. So cool. I do just want to give an apology. It's been bugging me for months since we did the Tim Ballard video, because I feel like you did all this great research, and that video on the whole was really strong, even though obviously it's going to piss off a lot of people who have been very converted to the Sound of Freedom Tim Ballard train. But I made this point right at the beginning about how a lot of the times the narratives that the right will peddle about human trafficking involves this perfect white victim, and so many people in the comments were like, well, the Sound of Freedom isn't about white victims, and OUR doesn't really go after just white children. So that was obviously an incorrect statement for me to make. It was rooted in the sort of history of stranger danger and other moral panics in the US that did often center white children being trafficked as kind of the thing, and the UN has even I left a pinned comment on the last video, you can go see it if you want, but the UN even issued a report talking about how a lot of the time concerns will only be about a specific type of victim that has historically in certain situations been white. Anyway, I just want to apologize for kind of throwing that video off right at the bat. I feel like we lost credibility and it's just been bugging me, so sorry.
Well, as they say in the You're Wrong About podcast, which you were initially quoting, this is a big country and a big world, and pretty much everything that can go wrong or be done badly is happening, but not necessarily at the scale at which is understood by your average Facebook user, right?
Yeah, for example, one of the criticisms we made in our other videos is that these false narratives that get perpetuated about what human trafficking looks like often, as we saw from, was it Jim Caviezel? What's his name? They often obscure the real child abuse that is happening a lot of the times inside of people's own homes and communities, by focusing on this other and these third world countries where everyone's morally bankrupt and all that stuff. It obscures the fact that most kids are being abused by people in their own families or in their own communities. And we saw it was our part 2 video, we dove into Jim Caviezel's comments, but he basically typecast all pedophiles as being liberals. And which, it's the pedophilia doesn't have a political party.
And if you push back on them, I'm sure they'd be like, oh, no, it's you can find statements from Tim where he's like, it's this world problem, but the woke agenda plays directly, and the pedophiles are salivating every time a woke person is elected, or...
And it's like, we know that these conservative Christian cultures run rampant with sex abuse. So it's like, saying that is obscuring the thing you actually have the ability to tackle on a widespread scale.
While conservatives are largely leading the fight to legalize marriage to children, for instance, to change the books on those types of things.
Things we went into in our other video. Where do we even start with this video? So much has happened since our last one.
Did we mention that, Tim, the Sound of Freedom connection? I think that's how most people today would be familiar with Tim Ballard, even if they had no prior exposure to Operation Underground Railroad or Tim Ballard. The Sound of Freedom movie, which again purports to be an adaptation of what trafficking looks like based on the real experiences of Tim Ballard. Many journalists, including those from Red Pilled America,
I know,
like there's
surprised.
hardcore conservatives who are like, this doesn't check out. We've compared Tim's statements with the actual court documents that were written by him and his agency at the time, and they're completely contradictory. And when he's been questioned on it, he goes back on details. Lynn Packer, who is the investigative journalist who's been reporting on this, I think longer than anybody, has pointed out these things. You can check him out on American Crime Journal.
I feel like a comment we should address that was huge on our last videos from people who didn't like the video was, these people are just raising awareness about human trafficking, so how could it be a bad thing? Surely we need to raise awareness. And we've kind of already touched on this in this intro in our other video, but it's like, if we're presenting people with a false picture of what human trafficking looks like, then we're obscuring the real one, which takes us further away from like effective systemic solutions. Also, there's ways that all of the narratives are obscuring like the sexual abuse and child abuse that's going on internally, which, I mean, oh God, it's just been like a weird month with like the 8 passengers Ruby Frankie stuff, like this therapist that was propped up by the Mormon Church for decades, and this mummy vlogger that was like followed by millions of people for her parenting. It just feels like so much stuff has happened, and it feels like children are just everything is like making my heart hurt, because it feels like so many people will use children as pawns in the service of their own ego, which I would argue OUR and Tim Ballard have done.
Yes.
And I don't know, it's all related, and it's all...
Also this week, the founder of Exodus, a Utah nonprofit anti-human trafficking organization, has been arrested on over 30 felony accounts, including fraud, theft, and forgery. Utah, the fraud capital of the United States, according to the Deseret News, is just rampant with this kind of stuff. Anywhere you see like intense moral panic, you'll see people who are manipulating that panic in order to satisfy their own egoic desires.
That's the thing.
We're conditioned to see evil as this like very conscious, calculated, like, I'm just going to go in and I'm going to abuse children.
Yeah.
And typically...
it's repressed desires and unconscious desires and like unconscious parts of yourself that you're not willing to look at.
And don't get me wrong, again, big country, big world, I'm sure there's those people out there.
Yeah.
But so much abuse that gets swept under the rug in churches, in schools, in government is people acting out their their repressed desires onto children because they have no outlet. The tweets you made today about repressed men coming from these pedophilic cultures, which the Mormon Church is. It was founded by a man who literally married children.
Yep. That's
coerced them into
hebephilia.
secret marriages. Okay, you start there.
And then for generations afterwards, like it wasn't just an isolated,
And the whole culture is created around keeping this secret. I mean, this is the events that led up to the death of Joseph Smith, was him being like, this isn't happening. Oh, a newspaper's publishing it, we gotta burn the newspaper down. That's why he went to jail, not for being a martyr.
And the whole culture is obviously centered around purity, and part of purity culture is the sexualization of children. Because, for example, like telling... this is an extreme example, but I heard that the Duggars didn't let their children dance because dancing leads to like swinging your body around, and that means
any kind of sensuality.
Yeah, but like even with like babies, and I'm like, you are sexualizing a baby. Like, and it's the same kind of thing, like when... which played out in the Duggar family. Yeah, don't fucking get me... Yeah, God. So that's a more extreme example, but even like the Mormon Church telling 11-year-old fucking prepubescent girls that they need to cover up their bodies. Like, you are sexualizing their bodies in doing that. So, like, pedophile culture and purity culture just go hand in hand. Also, just, like, prizing innocence and purity and, like, a lack of sexual experience and, like, infantilizing grown women and men as well. It's just like, it's all connected. And obviously the Mormon church is also a patriarchal church, which means that women and children, like by design, have less power in that system. And so predatory men, by design, can like get away with more things. Again, that's like how the church was founded, and like the whole system that Joseph Smith set up, like of course it was like set up in parallel to like his own things that he was doing and denying publicly, and having his like henchmen cover up for him, and then like smearing the names of women who rejected him and all of that.
Mm-hmm. And then now look at the church's policy with sexual abuse reports, where bishops, if predators are found out and confess to a bishop, they're shielded from legal repercussions from any investigation, so as to preserve the good name and report and the image of the church. And then the bishops are instructed to call a hotline, which is not for victim services. It's not helping a person rehabilitate from sexual abuse. They go to the church liability department to ensure that, again, the church can wash its hands and be like, we didn't do this. Well, that is effectively a sex abuse cover-up by not letting people know that this is happening and allowing these perpetrators to continue abusing. If you go to floodlit.org, I believe, or floodlight.org, they've been doing phenomenal work keeping track of all the LDS sexual abuse cases that have happened. And you can see case by case how many of these men, bishops, stake presidents, Sunday school teachers, seminary, all these people who first abused were shielded from justice, parents weren't alerted, and then they were called again to leadership positions, where then after a series of abuses, multiple witnesses, victims coming forward, they were finally brought to justice. Not being brought to justice by the church. The church was actively trying to avoid that. You can see that with Thomas S. Monson's son, who, after being fired for sexual harassment and soliciting a prostitute, was hired by the church's legal department. David McConkie, I believe his name, grandson of prophet, and the whole McConkie family, which is so interconnected with the Mormon hierarchy dynasty. I believe a stake president bishop who has been abusing multiple people. And when you're taught that no calling, that every calling comes from God, and that we're always supposed to sustain our leaders no matter what, and it's wrong to evil speak of the Lord's anointed.
Which was even more emphasized the further you go back in Mormon history.
Yeah. Well, then you create this culture where men are able to pretty much do what they want without checks and balances, and if they are caught, that's swept under the rug, and they're able to go back to doing their thing. Like, this happens all the time.
And because it's always men in charge, the men are obviously more likely to empathize with the experiences of other men who are probably guilty of doing things that they themselves are inclined to do, because in like a closed system where like healthy sexuality is clamped down on, and you don't have like any healthy sexual outlet for your sexuality, then of course you're going to go to these dysfunctional ways as an outlet for that. And if you are a man in a position of power, which you're likely to be in the LDS Church, well, the two go hand in hand.
And
marital rape.
Oh, yeah, well, there's a lot. I was just going to say there's a lot about marriage, but we don't have to get into it. I was going to say that, again, because people view other people, the people in the third world countries who are just wanting to abuse children, we got to go bust them with guns, and this is the only way to do it. They see those people as villains that need to be taken down through the most brutish and bumbling efforts.
That are denounced by experts.
While the actual, like the abusers in their circle are not seen as predators. This is Brother Jacobson who's struggling with the temptation, and he's promised me that he'll stop, and he's repenting. And I know that he's a good person who's just trying to, avoid temptation like all of us. And so there's that like compassion and that sort of non-dualistic morality that gets implied to people in the chosen in group, while the out group's sins are maligned as evil. And it's telling that these men who, they're not going and, in a lot of cases, for instance, the producer of the Sound of Film movie, who Vice broke the story today, is caught on camera.
We're going to go through that article.
Feeling up one of the child victims that they were purportedly rescuing. The thing is she hadn't been trafficked prior to that point. They're talking with these traffickers, some degree of sex workers who are dealing in sex with adults, and And he's like, no, you got to find somebody younger. You got to find someone más fresca, it
Because,
says.
by the way, what a lot of people report on these operations is that they'd go to these third world countries kind of maybe expecting there to be like this semi-abundant supply of underage girls, and everyone would just be like, what the fuck? No, we don't have kids.
And so they recruit these girls to be trafficked for the first time by these undercover operatives who then abuse them under the guise of rescuing them.
I know.
Which is essentially reinventing sex trafficking. If your anti-trafficking work is going to a poor country to create a demand for child sex trafficking that was not happening prior, and then you abuse them, that is sex trafficking. That's trauma tourism. You've just reinvented it and allowed yourself to be the good guy who gets to take it out on the bad guy who fell into your scheme.
While conveniently getting to touch a 16-year-old girl's breasts and then laughing about it afterwards with another guy at OUR. We're going to get into that article.
Did we even talk about the church's denouncement?
Honestly,
there's so much. We've been apart for like a week, and now we're finally getting to talk about it together for the first time.
I read the article this morning of the producer of Sound of Freedom touching an underage girl. And they have transcripts of like the back and forth between him and another guy at OUR, and it...
More disturbing than I even thought.
It really upset me. I feel like I'm so desensitized at this point to so much stuff because we've been doing this YouTube channel for so long, and so much of obviously what we talk about with Mormonism is like the abuse of women and children, but this was just, it's just heinous. Like, it certainly seems to, and this was like a thing that I kind of felt in my gut, and I'm a skeptic, so I don't assume because I have a gut feeling that it means it's true, but I just had a gut feeling. Well, actually, to be fair, I initially listened to the You're Wrong About episode on human trafficking years ago, but once I found out more about like OUR, I just felt like these men from pedophilic purity cultures, which like we're calling a spade, that is like what Mormonism is. And also, like, the United States in general is still, like, very, like, purity culture, pedophile culture, and especially within these, like, conservative religious circles. But anyway, men from those cultures, as far as I'm concerned, are the last people that should be doing this kind of very sensitive work. Like, this is... And also, like, coming up with their own method that involves them having to cosplay as pedophiles who touch a 16-year-old girl's boobs in the name of getting traffickers, when experts are saying don't do this. Like, they've come up with that method themselves.
Right. It's not even like How to Catch a Predator, where they have an adult standing in to play a child. They're using actual children as bait.
Who may have never been trafficked before.
Exactly.
Like,
You're creating a trauma for a unique new trauma for someone so that you can make millions and feel like a hero while you felt them up.
I just think it's a bit fucking suspicious, and I'm not suggesting that, like, anyone who gets involved in activism work is guilty of the thing that they're trying to fight, but I just think in this specific instance, Mormon men who seem to be of this very, like, alpha business bro mindset...
Literally alpha con man Jeremiah the Bull Evans, who partnered with Tim Ballard.
That's a whole other thing. But, like, those types of men being so obsessed with caring about children and fighting the abuse of children, not within their own church, not within their own communities, but in these other places where they conveniently get to go on these, like, unregulated missions with no oversight, where they cosplay as pedophiles and go to strip clubs and interact with these young girls who apparently just, like, had to touch her boobs or they would know that they were the police or whatever it was. I just think that's all so fucking suspicious. And given what we know in psychology about how... when you repress healthy sexuality, it will come out in dysfunctional ways. I just don't trust any of it. Like, these are the last people on earth that should be doing anti-child sex trafficking work. Something that sensitive should be so trauma-informed. Ideally I'd like to see women doing it, but I mean, it's not, that's a whole other thing, but...
Well, and the women who are doing it are criticizing these men.
And then Tim's calling them a bitch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think,
Meg Conley, who went on a jump with Tim Ballard, who was asked Mormon, by Tim to defend him in writing, and who sought him out for help in crafting that response, and only was met with the line, she's a bitch.
And who had no incentive to turn against him. It's like her in-group, and she was like in on the thing. Like she was for it until she saw what it looked like.
Exactly, and she wrote today on Twitter that this organization is crawling with men like that this is not an isolated incident.
We've had a lot of reports.
And it goes along with like what Tim is doing for so
we'll get
the church, the LDS Church, I should back up and say Attorney General of Utah, Sean Reyes, recently made a post about his friend, True Patriot, who will be seeking Mitt Romney's vacant Senate seat.
Which, by the way, is that normal for them to do like a, like hint at someone like, ooh, big announcement? I haven't really heard of that necessarily
Sean Reyes is not your typical... I mean, we could do a whole episode on Mitt Romney. I've been dying to talk about Mitt Romney. We'll do a different one on Mitt Romney.
Support us on Patreon if you want to see that.
My perception of Mitt Romney has just been a roller coaster, and it's the interviews he's done with Atlantic now are so telling and insightful. I can't wait to read the book. He's retiring in at least part due to his fear over his own conservative fan base, who he's like, these people are bloodthirsty. He said he was afraid for his life on the stand in front of them in Utah.
For standing up for the value. I mean, I'm not saying he's done a perfect job, but he has more than a lot of Mormon politicians stood up for the values that Mormonism claims to espouse, like honesty and integrity, blah, blah, blah. But then the minute they see it in one of their guys who is handsome and doing a good job, it's so fucked up how like these things that people claim for years and years and years and years and years to be all about, and that they criticize us for not being about, then it's like they have the minute their like ego comes into play, it's just claiming to care about anything only up to the point where it doesn't affect your fragile ego is not caring about it. That just shows that it was only ever about your ego and tribalism and winning status points and like feeling moral, but like you're not willing to like question your own ideology or like your own heroes, as we've seen in the Tim Ballard thing. Should we get into the...
Yeah, so with the announcement by the statement by Sean Reyes, people immediately were like, oh, Tim Ballard, Sean Reyes has been fundraising with Tim Ballard for years. Yeah. He went on jumps himself. I think in order to get ahead of that, knowing what they knew about Tim Ballard, the church, through its spokesperson, reached out to Vice, Deseret News, and KSL, issuing a statement where they said they denounced his morally unacceptable activities. Yeah.
They denounced him for using Elder Ballard, the apostle who he's not related to, for using his name to fundraise and to... But I think they didn't come out and say sexual misconduct, did they? Even
though this is well known. Again, in the time since our last episode on this, we were talking about him, his connection with Glenn Beck and all that stuff. Well, like days afterward, we found out that he was actually fired from Operation Underground Railroad, just following our last episode where we discussed Tim's connection with Glenn Beck and others. We found out that Tim had been fired by OUR and let go by Glenn Beck.
And we knew it was for sexual misconduct. And I'm like, if we've known
all
that
our
for
channels
months,
of private communication, we didn't publish it because we can't go on rumors. Yeah. But now that this is like a public thing, we're able to talk about it.
And the church knows more than us.
Oh yeah.
The LDS Church does not make a habit of just standing up for victims of sexual harassment or child abuse victims or anything like that.
Know.
They are happy to throw advocates for child abuse victims and sexual harassment victims under the bus to protect their own image. This is clearly a PR move, but it still does say a lot because they have like supported Tim for years. Like they've now scrubbed all of their references of him from their website. They
say we've never like condoned or been in business, and it's like you literally sold all his really shitty books that are just like the worst historical fanfic you could imagine.
Yeah, they promoted him a bunch. The Tomsters did a good Instagram post showing some of the receipts, but yeah.
They've got his stories on the website, which have now been scrubbed. So yeah, they make this statement condemning him. Part of that Vice report was the investigators were able to return to the case that was opened up by the state of Utah, and they had 10,000 pages of psychic readings from the psychic Janet Russin, I believe her name is.
Funded by donors.
Yeah, which he was trying to keep quiet, by the way, where she's channeling the Book of Mormon prophet Nephi to get intel on predators. As we know from the failed Gardaí rescue mission, she has not been successful in doing that, although she continues to be employed by Tim. So
wait, by Tim? Like
at this point, I don't know if she's with OUR officially now or has gone with Tim and Spear, or but as far as I know, she's still in connection with the movement. And a lot of our hate messages have come from evangelicals. And it's like, how do you feel knowing that this mission is entirely led by a woman
psychic.
Mormon psychic channeling a Book of Mormon prophet.
Should a woman even be channeling? I don't think so.
A prophet who, by the way, kidnapped people and forced them in a transatlantic journey to the Americas.
Yeah, so Mormon Church came out with a statement. I mean, they basically just said, keep Ballard's name out your mouth.
It's funny, people have pointed out that there's like a whole thing with Russell Brand, Russell Ballard, Tim Ballard, all right now.
That was weird.
Anyway, yeah, so Tim Ballard has been, as we know from, again, the grade A reporting of Lynn Packer and American Crime Journal, that M. Russell Ballard has been in cahoots with Tim Ballard for quite some time, including calling him, giving blessings, but then Tim has been using that as a way of pretty much justifying all his actions, including his for-profit sectors, which he was designing to channel the money generated through OUR donors and other funnels into his for-profit
like
scheme.
the LDS Church does with tithing. Very cool.
Kind of like that. And it's funny, they've posted pictures of the now infamous whiteboard meetings, and you can see the partners of his top-level thing is like Tim Ballard, some other person, and then it's like M. Russell Ballard, silent partner. And so I think what the church is what's happening here is the church realized M. Russell Ballard got way in over his head. He took a scam, hook, line, and sinker, and now issuing the statement is literally the only way that the church can be absolved of guilt by one of its representatives.
And very on brand for them to be like, we've never supported him.
Yeah, exactly. And then being like, their friendship was actually terminated several months ago.
Oh, several months.
It's giving like several months shy of her 15th birthday. And it's like, several months? People have been reporting on this for decades. Elizabeth Smart, a trafficking victim herself, an anti-trafficking advocate herself, who worked with Tim Ballard on the board of governors of OUR. She and her father, who also worked on the board, left saying that they were a money-making scheme, that they weren't using the money to help victims. Elizabeth Smart said that in 2014.
The line of logic from the people that love Tim Ballard and the Sound of Freedom has just been basically any criticism of him or the organization means you're on the side of the pedophiles. And it's like,
or you are a pedophile.
Well,
you are
then why are all these experts who have devoted their lives to evidence-based action against human trafficking, or to actually understanding the problem at a systemic level, or actual victims like Elizabeth Smart, who are you gonna come out and tell me Elizabeth Smart is on the side of pedophiles? I highly doubt it. You know what I mean? It's like time and time again, all of these experts have said this is hurting more than it's helping. But it's a perfect line, isn't it? Like any criticism, and that means you're a pedophile.
Another understated aspect of the Elizabeth Smart story is that it's not just some random guy, right? It's a self-proclaimed Mormon prophet who took her as an additional polygamous wife.
Yeah, she knows what to look for.
This is the Mormon story.
Yeah.
It's happened literally hundreds of times in Mormon and Utah history. I saw a report today that scholars have identified some 400 Latter-day Saint schism groups, and so many of them. This is the playbook, the thing that Tim is using now. Shortly after the statement from the church, Vice issued another article which again publicized the allegations by up to 7 women who are saying that Ballard used these raids as ways to groom women, saying, what would you do to save a child? We need to take a shower together, otherwise they're going to know that we're undercover and not actually married. We need to sleep in the bed. We need to kiss together because...
I need to send you a picture of me in my underwear asking what would you do.
Yeah.
And all 7 of these women are detailing the same tactics. And again, these are women who are on the side of OUR and this mission. It's
who went in with the best of intentions.
It's not just all these people that are not part of it and just are anti-religious or anti-Mormon or pro-trap. It's these are people that care about this issue and have devoted their lives to this issue and were willing to give substantial time and resources to helping
to put their lives on the line.
Yeah. Sorry, I need water so badly. It keeps following.
May I have some? So this is from the Vice article, again, about the Mormon denouncement and M. Russell Ballard, an apostle for the church's involvement. It says, according to the former development director's statements to investigators, Tim Ballard claimed that Elder Ballard was involved in Liberty 89, a business in Utah whose registered agent is Tim Ballard. At meetings with Tim Ballard and a group of his associates who claimed to have visions and special intelligence of the second coming, The former development director said she was made aware that this venture had to do with God calling Tim Ballard to restore America to the covenant. So, evangelical viewers, how do you feel, again, that this scheme is not only set up to portray a false idea about what trafficking looks like, Tim Ballard's role in it, but also to eventually convert you to Mormonism? Ain't that nice? Well, now Elder Ballard, realizing that he is I don't know if he realized it or the other members of the Quorum of the 12 were like, we got to put the kibosh on this. You got to throw your friend under the bus. Mm-hmm. A secondhand statement from a church spokesperson is, some people were saying on Twitter, like, he was very brave for making this, and I was like, it's literally the least he could do after
Who is brave?
Elder Ballard. Oh. And it's like, for releasing a press statement through a spokesperson not on your own, I think that was intentionally done. A very savvy, cunning PR move that can, say, we wash our hands of this, we have no guilt, we have no part of this, and then also have it 1 degree removed from the actual source, so that the far-right extremists who are becoming a growing problem in the church, which is, I think, why they're trying to stamp this out in its infancy, his run for Senate, I mean, so that the conspiratory-minded people like Tim Ballard can say, that wasn't an official thing. Tim Ballard released a statement in response to this where he's like, this is an evil lie. It's from the pedophiles who have infiltrated the highest levels. And it's like, when you're calling your own church liars and saying that the church hasn't publicly verified, public statements are literally how they verify. And it was verified through the Deseret News and is verified through KSL, both news arms, communication arms of the LDS Church.
It's also just funny because believing LDS people will always accuse anyone who criticizes them of being like evil pedophiles. I mean, that's I just feel like because pedophilia is like kind of the worst thing in the world, that's always like the go-to for anyone who just needs to like quickly ad hominem attack anyone.
Except for the people who are accused of it with plentiful evidence.
But then it's like these people always seem to come down on the side of not defending victims of abuse, because when the church does it, they're on the side of the church. When the church condemns it, they're not on the side. It's like, what's going on here? You're always on the side of the abuser. It's
very interesting to see the reactions on Twitter among believers. Kwaku L, who has been a Mormon apologist, an outspoken Mormon apologist for some time, he criticized the church publicly on Twitter, saying, the church is in charge of the spiritual welfare of 17 million people, and they shouldn't be breaking protocol to do stuff like this. And it was like, well, they did this for Sam Young, they did this for John Dehlin. He said this sets a bad precedent, and it's like, oh my guy, you must not know the church history very well. This was the precedent that was started in like 1830 to 1844. William Law, Joseph Smith excommunicated him was like, you're out of the first presidency for talking about polygamy, for talking about his predatory affairs, yada yada yada.
Sam Young, for our Christian, ex-Christian, never Mormon viewers, was a guy who tried
a Mormon
bishop who tried to he was campaigning to change the policy in the Mormon church of kids having to talk to their bishops in rooms alone about their sexual activities. So, a champion for kids' rights, especially in the realm of sex.
And was excommunicated for raising the discussion.
Not invited to have a discussion with top leaders, as Tim Ballard was.
Right.
Because it implicates them in some way. So we're obviously glad the church has spoken out about Tim, because it's good to create some cognitive dissonance in the minds of people who have been fully bought into his scheme. But I mean, we'd be naive to think it's not just a self-serving move, obviously.
And it's very interesting to watch people now like Thoughtful Faith, Kwaku, and even Glenn Beck publicly on Twitter was calling out the church.
People speak negatively of the church.
And the type of person who would call us apostates for criticizing the church's handling of sexual abuse cases are now themselves being called apostates, and they're like, it's perfectly fine to disagree with the church, and is like, it wasn't when I disagreed with the church.
Also, I would say that, although we never got excommunicated, I would say that it actually, if the church is responsible for 17 million people's spiritual health, bit of an inflated number, but whatever, we'll go with it. I think it is important to call out a charlatan in your community who is
running for political office,
has an ever-growing influence, is soliciting donations and kind of using his affiliation with the church and a top Mormon apostle as part of that. And then also apparently using his affiliation with the top Mormon apostle as part of his scheme to, well, it seems like he was attempting to coerce women into sexual activity. Sounds like none of them went with it. But I mean, 7 different women allege it's sexual harassment. He's guilty of that on apparently 7 counts or more. So I think that makes sense for the church to condemn that. Like, that feels appropriate for a spiritual organization. Again, I know they're doing it for their own gain, but
it seems like his distress over the situation, it seems very real. Like,
no, yeah,
because he's like, what the hell? The church, who has been telling me that I've been doing the right thing, that I'm part of the mission to bring people into the fold and to save children, who has been selling my books and publishing me, and you know, are now saying that they have no, like, I could see why he's like, what the fuck? But this is the MO.
Because you know Joseph Smith would have sent a text with him in his underwear being like, how far would you go with me? And then when the woman's like, not for a tour, he'd be like, she was a bitch.
Yeah, be like, but there's an angel with a drawn sword who's going to kill us unless this happens.
That's the thing that's interesting, is people like Tim, like generally those personality types, as they get more power, they get more and more dangerous and like more unhinged. And like we saw that with
he's
Joseph
giving
Smith.
Chad Daybell vibes,
yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
And it will be interesting in the coming days to see how this happens, because now he's calling the church spokesperson a liar. He's saying that the church would never do this.
Yeah.
And if I wonder if he persists, if there will be actual disciplinary actions following. And if so, then what happens? Does he become rogue Christian? I saw him on a video wearing a cross.
He'd become rogue Christian for sure, yeah. Because Mormons don't wear crosses, generally.
But again, the whole thing has been about how Mormonism is true and how he's doing this to maintain the legacy of the American founders of the Covenant, who were also slaveholders, never you mind, and Joseph Smith, who also married children, never mind, and also preached slavery, never mind. Like
all these never minds, I feel like, are just indicative of this thing that, like, the thing that people repress in themselves is the thing that they will publicly claim to care about the most. Like, the purity culture people are usually the people with the biggest problems abusing kids. And then the drag queens, who are very, like, embodied in their sexuality and feel able to, like, embrace it freely, guess what? They don't need to abuse kids. Again, everything happens. Every type of person can abuse kids. We're not trying to make, like, us versus them groups. But in general, a person who is like fully embraced their sexuality does not need to coerce powerless people, and also doesn't have the same kind of, like, a drag queen doesn't have the same access to like vulnerable children as a Mormon bishop does. You know, it's so it's always like throwing stones elsewhere to try and detract from the fact that you are like in that camp, and the calls are coming from inside the house, as we talked about in our last video.
Especially when you're viewing children themselves and sexuality general, not in the lens of just like, here's children, here's sex, but this is a temptation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oof.
Chilling. Sound off in the comments if this was you, but we've heard over the years like dozens and dozens of people say that in their Mormon households, the girls were not allowed to wear tank tops in case they caused their brothers to stumble, or like even their dads, or like, do you know what I mean? It's like modesty even within their own home, because that's how sexualized their bodies were from a young age. They couldn't even relax in their own home. It's all interconnected. Like, there's a reason it's always the fucking most homophobic politicians that come out as like being a gay man having sex with minors, and there's a reason. It's, again, I'm obviously not saying that anyone who is an activist for anything is doing that thing. That's absurd, but it just feels like there's like all these links, and it just drives me crazy, because people like Tim Ballard, I was saying this in our break, but like there's such a product of patriarchy, because like the women who are fighting human trafficking, you know, like the child psychologists and the people that are doing research and, you know, the world's leading expert on international human trafficking
actually
law,
doing aftercare.
Yeah, like they're not getting any glory for that work, but they're doing like the actual stuff necessary to fight this problem in a meaningful way, not just like going to third world countries and going to a strip club and like touching a 16-year-old girl's boobs, laughing about it, creating more demand for kids to be trafficked.
Shall we read that account?
Yeah, this article is harrowing, so fucking 12 trigger warnings.
Yeah, this was published by Vice News. Again, today, Sound of Freedom producer felt the naked breasts of apparently underage trafficking victim. That headline alone, I was like, this is too much. So, this is Paul Hutchinson, an executive producer of the film Sound of Freedom. Footage of this incident and its aftermath was captured by videographers working with Operation Underground Railroad.
This says the descriptions were included among documents obtained by Vice News through a public records request and make clear that the trafficking victim appeared to be and was believed at the time by Hutchinson and OUR operatives to be about 16 years old. They also assert that OUR believed the footage had been destroyed. It says...
Isn't that telling?
Yeah, so fucking telling. A description of one of the videos written by an investigator shows Hutchinson expressing concerns over whether he could be prosecuted by Mexican authorities over the incident. He was speaking to Matt Osborne, an OUR operative, who dismissed his worries while making clear he didn't think the video should be shown to the US government.
I don't think we should show them that.
Fun fact, Osborne, the guy Hutchinson is talking to about this, is currently the CEO and president of OUR, so that feels relevant.
Hutchinson says he broke away from Tim Ballard, quietly didn't bother to mention it.
Because of Tim Ballard's sexual misconduct.
Yeah, and all the rest.
God, this is the Spider-Man meme.
Yeah, literally. So he's left OUR for those reasons, and this is coming out about him now.
A detailed description of another video shows Hutchinson potentially creating demand for trafficking while posing as a wealthy sex tourist. According to an investigator's description, he asked a trafficker who was showing him pictures of sex workers for younger girls, or as he and the trafficker both described them, mas fresca. The trafficker, according to the investigator's description of the video, tells women who are working with him to find girls as young as 14 to provide to Hutchinson. So
he's talking to traffickers, there's people there, trafficked adults, and we've heard this from other people who have been on jumps and who reported to us that the child sex slaves that Tim always uses, the term he uses to describe the people he's liberating, are usually like adult sex workers who have come of their own free will, who have been offered a bunch of money by American tourists.
Yeah, who desperately need the money.
Yeah, and then when they're like, hey, this isn't cutting it, we need you to go find kids to bring into this scheme. You are literally, and you know, as we heard in one account that we talked about in our last video, they went into an impoverished neighborhood and told impoverished parents, that they would give them a life-changing amount of money to have their kids come to this party for one night. Obviously I mean, when you can't feed your kids, you can understand how that might be like a compelling thing. Obviously not right, but anyway. The article goes on to say there is no... And again, these aren't like necessarily like prepubescent children. I'm sure it happens and they're out there. And yeah. But like a lot of these are like older teens, and not saying that that's like less bad, but these are the exact types of blurred lines that they are justifying elsewhere. For instance, with the marriages of Joseph Smith. Yeah. Or saying here that like, oh, well, we got a sworn affidavit that she was actually 18, even though at the time I believe she was 16. As you said, it's trauma tourism, and it's just a new kind of trafficking, isn't it? Because if they've never been trafficked before and suddenly they're in a situation where they're being filmed by Westerners, used in fundraising efforts, there are guns, there's suddenly this like traumatic blow up of a situation happening that they didn't ask to be a part of, you're not saving them from anything. You embroiled them in that scheme. Yeah. So it says, there's no suggestion in the files that Hutchinson's behavior was aimed at anything but identifying and exposing traffickers. Well, of course, because that's the perfect cover, right? How does that expose kind of irrelevant either way, yeah. But federal agents with extensive experience working undercover overseas told Vice News that his methods ran contrary to best practice. For years, experts in the anti-trafficking field have raised concerns about OUR's methods potentially creating demand for trafficking victims due to scenarios precisely like this one. Rather than finding minors who were already being trafficked, requesting younger victims while undercover could cause traffickers to try and find people to fill that request. In other words, such a request would not rescue trafficking victims, it could potentially create them. Good job, OUR. Okay, the files obtained by Vice News consist of audio transcripts and time-stamped descriptions of what investigator Brian Purdy of the Davis County Attorney's Office saw while reviewing the footage, which OUR believed it had scrubbed. A description of one video taken in 2016 starts, Paul Hutchinson and his team are standing in the street area talking with local men. They cross the street and go into a club where females are seen walking toward them down a staircase. Paul Hutchinson approaches a female and lifts both of his hands and places them on each of the female's naked breasts. The female uses her hand to push down Paul's hands and pull her shirt down. There's another female standing above them. So she's uncomfortable. Yeah, she's saying, yep. Paul leans in and kisses the first female on the side of the cheek.
I just don't believe, I'm sorry, but there's no way it's like, unless you kiss this girl on the cheek and touch her boobs, they're going to think you're the cops. There's no way it came down to
She's
that.
already trying to hide it, already
I'm
trying
sorry.
to push it away, and he's like, this is the only way.
Even in this stupid reality that these men have concocted where this whole operation is legitimate, which it's obviously not, experts are saying it's not, it's completely like has no oversight, it's just complete bullshit. But like even under that reality, if you genuinely are like singularly focused on fighting child sex trafficking
for and behalf of
you would
the
do
victims,
everything you can, like you did not need to do that. You would do everything in your power to err on the side of like, I'm not going to further traumatize these don't get me started.
Because the children in this instance are a means to an end for them busting these criminals versus being the end themselves.
I know. You're the criminal, Paul. Anyway, it says, the adult male in the white shirt, who I believe is the trafficker, says, you want more touch, Phil? Oh, no more touch, he says. Another man says...
Even the trafficker's like, hey, man, knock it off.
Trafficker's like, this fucked up. Another man says, you like more 16, and that he can provide IDs. Hutchinson pays one of these men for showing them to me right there, referring to the girl's boobs. This is another audio description of a video, and a local...
From the same instance, right?
Or from the same... It was taken the same day.
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
Taken in the same club and in the same time frame using a different camera. So a local male's voice says, another girl like her, 16, she's 16. One of the OUR operatives is heard saying, let's get the hell out of here. Hutchinson is heard saying, yeah, let's get out of here, I'm down $1,000.
Would hate for
A
him to be
male
down
voice
$1,000.
then says, for $1,000 you got your hands on some breasts, says a male voice, to laughter.
Oof.
This is where it got really dark for me, and that's not the first time they laugh about this. But they're just like, ooh, this isn't like going that well, and I just, I'm down $1,000 for touching that girl's boobs. And they're talking about it like they are just people who are at a strip club. This is them talking among themselves. And they're laughing about it instead of like, oh my God, I feel sick. I had to like touch a 16-year-old girl's boobs in that. Like if you genuinely believed this was about not blowing your cover, which it clearly wasn't, because even the guy selling was like, no touching without even, you did not need to do that. It wasn't even, it sounds like it was like, even in the culture of trafficking, like a bit weird. Mm-hmm. And you're not walking away from that like, oh God, that was horrific. You're walking away laughing. It gets worse.
Laughing, saying, what was I going to do? Asks a second male voice, whose words are described as being interrupted repeatedly by laughter. Okay, she's 16. Here, feel them. They're nice. I'm like, shit, those are 16. Not she's 16. Those are 16. Because again, in his, like, the implicit sexism and sex objectification of the victim is coming out even just like unconsciously in the way that they're talking about it.
This is why this article really hit me, because again, I've had this like feeling for months that these men are just like playing out their own unconscious desires and it's all creepy, but you really see it in the way that they didn't find this incident harrowing. The only point at which they're disturbed
some
is
did,
when...
and I think it's nervous laughter that they're like, whoa, shit, man.
Well, yeah, but...
Because let's read the next.
Okay, so then the first male voice says, you think they're underage, huh? A third male voice says, oh yeah, I would put money on that. The men continue their discussion for a bit before the first male voice says, yeah, those girls were young, man. And then the second male voice says, I don't know how wise it was to grab that girl's boobs, though. And then the first male voice says...
Ain't that telling?
You didn't get that on video or anything, did you? And then...
Famous last words. Sorry, can we just take a quick pause for that? You didn't get that on video, did you?
Like, you did something wrong. If you genuinely believed it...
And then they tried to scrub it. Nothing went wrong. I'm totally confident. I am perfectly confident that everything I did was perfectly ethical. I just immediately said, you didn't get that on camera, did you? And then tried to scrub it from the record. And then tried to advocate it for not being shown to the government. I
know, it's like, we've said it a million times, but like your whole thing is like, it's wrong that these children are being... like grown men are engaging in sexual activity with children. You just engaged in sexual activity with a child.
Well, no, because then he sought out I think he sought out the sworn affidavit that she was 18 in order
100%.
to say, because this is
He
his
probably
defense.
paid a Mexican authority to say that, because earlier the guy said, I've got IDs that she's 16.
Ooh.
That's what the trafficker said earlier.
Yeah.
So it's very convenient that, I'm not being funny, but aren't Mexican authorities like kind of notorious for being pretty payoffable? I've always heard that. Is that true?
I have heard the same. I don't know what statistically that would be. But Hutchinson's defense is, your references to the trafficker testing our legitimacy is a non-story. I have a sworn affidavit by a federal police saying she was over 18.
Why would the police have evidence when the trafficker said, I've got IDs?
And the initial thing was like, oh, she's definitely really young. She's really young. Oh shit, you didn't get that on video. Oh shit, well, you shouldn't have done that.
I also just want to say, I actually don't give that much of a shit whether she's 16 or 18.
No, you shouldn't have done it.
It's complete.
Regardless.
It was non-consensual either way. She pushed you away. She's still a fucking child, whether she's 16 or 18. That you're not going to get off on a legal technicality in terms of like the morality of it all. You are a grown-ass man, presumably with a wife and kids and a fucking Mormon testimony.
I'm surprised he wasn't like, well, the age of consent there is actually 16, like they're doing with Russell Brand, and it's like, you're the people you're trying to bust.
Yeah. So a description. Oh God, this is just. A description of a third video covers a February 2016 phone call between Hutchinson and Matt Osborne. Again, Matt Osborne is now currently the CEO of OUR. During the call, which took place on speakerphone and was filmed in a room with Hutchinson and several other men in it, Osborne talks to the videographer filming the call about the hard drive containing the footage he shot, at which point Hutchinson brings up the incident at the club. During the conversation, he refers to himself in the third person as Paul Stone, which is his undercover name. So he's immediately trying to distance himself from the crime by saying like, oh no, that was my stage name.
My Sinsona did it, not me.
So Hutchinson says, when you get the hard drive, I have to confess something. But I believed that it helped to make them really believe that we weren't police officers in any way. Starts to laugh. So we were taken to the strip club. Paul laughs again, as well as the man next to him. Okay,
Which seems to be a pretty common, is like, well, first item of business for fighting trafficking is we all gotta go to the strip club, get plastered, touch some people, and then we'll figure it out. And then we'll ask the sidekick where the child slaves are hidden.
Okay, so the very first time that V was vetting us out, and he took us to the strip club, and the owner of the strip club brought down the minors, and the very first time V's shown us any minors and brought down these minors. Well, Paul Stone, referring to himself as the undercover name, is standing there at the bottom of these stairs, and these girls working the strip club, these two minors, come down. The owner of the strip club pulls up one of their shirts and grabs one of Paul Stone's hands and places it on her breast, so it's on the video. I think he's lying, which we'll get into later.
Yeah, it doesn't say that in the transcript.
No, the transcript is that...
he originally lifted the shirt, and then Hutchinson went in on his own.
Oh, I thought he lifted up the shirt as well. Oh, yeah, the other guy lifted up the shirt, but then, yeah. I just want to find out if I'm going to get in big trouble from the Mexican authority for touching a 16-year-old on film. But I thought you said in your statement that the Mexican authorities have a sworn affidavit that she was 18. So why on earth would you be worried about getting in trouble with the Mexican authorities for touching a 16-year-old on film?
I don't remember all the dates here, but it would be interesting to compare the dates that this all happened, when they got the affidavit versus when he made this original statement of like, am I going to be in trouble? And it's like, well, we better get an affidavit that she's...
If he even has an affidavit, or, if that's even real, who knows? That's just like a bullshit thing he said to Vice News, but I don't trust this man to be telling the truth. So anyway, Osborne, the now CEO, says, is it clear that they pulled your hand there?
Not of OUR, of the other one, right?
No, Matt Osborne is now the CEO of OUR, but I can edit that out.
Okay.
So Osborne says, is it clear that they pulled your hand there? And then Vice says, in the copy of the description obtained by Vice, the entire passage is highlighted and the word lie is written next to it with a margin note reading, Paul puts both hands on voluntarily.
All caps.
Those appear to be an investigator's notes. And then Hutchinson says, it's not clear on the video, which is funny because, like, have you even seen the video? But you're like, no, it's not clear on the video that they put my hand there, but they definitely did. And then, like, Vice is telling us that, this is all such bullshit.
That in the report done by investigators, by Davis County investigators, who are probably mostly Mormon.
Definitely.
Let's be real, this is like Provo and Mormondom. who I'm sure do not want to blemish the good name of OUR or Tim Ballard or any of their associates like Attorney General Sean Reyes or whoever.
So Hutchinson said, I was standing on the side and he grabbed my hand from down on the right hand and my right hand side as he pulled up her shirt and put them up. Paul then raised his hands, won his right hand while holding the phone, and then raised his left hand in a motion of grabbing with his hand. And it's also just like so bullshit, 'cause it's like if you're saying he grabbed your hand and put it on her boobs, you wouldn't then bring the other hand up. Do you know what I mean? It's just ooh. So he says, and so we feel like, and if we were all there and we all feel like if I had hesitated and, oh yeah, I'm not really interested in touching that right now as he was pulling it up. I think it would have thrown up a lot of red flags. But that is on the hard drive. I just wanted to run that by and see what your thoughts are. And then Osborne says, yeah, I don't think at this point that will be an issue. Maybe if it was the Mexicans.
Again, one of the benefits of doing this outside of U.S. jurisdiction is that you can never be held accountable for any of this.
And we're sending it just the Mexicans. I don't want this video to be HSI, the US Embassy, because I'm sure, and I've done it before too one time, I'm sure that technically you guys probably entrap some of these people.
Jesus!
So he's openly saying, technically, he even uses the word technically, which means he knows that it's just getting off on a technicality. He's like, I've done this before too, but don't worry, technically you probably entrapped someone from...
Entrapment is already, acknowledging that it is in fact entrapment is already so big on its own.
He's saying entrapment of the traffickers though, right?
Yeah, but, I mean, yeah, we can keep going.
Oh, but yeah, it's kind of, yeah. He said, try not to, and I've done it before accidentally, so I'm just content that it's not an issue.
You've accidentally felt somebody up who you were supposed to be saving and protecting, who you trafficked for the first time?
Not surprising.
You did that on accident once? Oopsie.
It's also highlighting the fucking issue with the patriarchy, which is like, this man is like, yeah, I've done that too, temptation for all of us. So immediately these men are forming like an alliance with each other over their shared crimes, right? Which is what we see in patriarchy all the time. The bishop is more likely to empathize with the guy who sexually abused a woman than with the woman herself. So a man sitting on a couch, according to the description, tells Hutchinson, the only thing you have to do is not tell your bishop. Hutchinson laughs.
Insane. Unhinged.
According to
unconscionable.
Yeah. And also the fact that the other guy just like willingly admitted, like, yeah, I've done it too before accidentally, just like accidentally touched a minor's boobs.
Just don't tell your bishop or there might be some consequences.
There is no fucking way that even if a trafficker was like, look, see, nice boobs, that you were expected to touch them.
Especially, and everyone else is like, oh, you probably should have done that.
And you yourself were like, ow, shit, those were nice 16-year-old boobs. Okay, according to an investigator's notes, in the video, a trafficker is showing Hutchinson and a male associate photos of females on his phone. Paul and the other male are joking that they are old and saying 20, 22, 30, 40 years old. The trafficker says 16 and they ask him who. He replies he doesn't know them, but states these are the girls. Paul pulls out his wallet and gives the guy $20. Then says, I'll give you $100 just to see them. Paul states, más pequeño, meaning more small, as he is handing the trafficker the money. They continue to see images of women on the traffickers' phones of what appear, based on Paul and other team members' statements, to be adult women in their 20s and 30s. The traffickers try to say the girls are 16 or 17, but Paul would say they look like they were 30 and continue to ask for younger girls. The description ends with an account of the trafficker talking to two females and telling them to go out and find the smallest, the more young you can find.
So fucking evil.
This has led to the trafficker telling girls, go out and find younger women. You have just created a demand for trafficking while sexually abusing a minor.
You are demanding trafficking victims. This is so fucking crazy.
Evil,
in poor countries.
Evil is unconsciousness.
Yes. Haiti, where the average person is making less than $2 a day. Try to subside on $2 a day. They're showing up and there's... The fact that they have to haggle with every single person they come to and be like, you gotta go find them for us.
Yeah.
What?
And the fact that all the traffickers are just trying to like lie to them and tell them they're younger. Although it sounds like this girl actually was 16. So basically, OUR responded.
This claim that millions and millions of tiny children are being sold as sex slaves all over the world. And it's like, you're having trouble finding them, the ones who apparently are seeing them everywhere, having to haggle for them and create new victims. This is so fucking crazy.
Meanwhile, back home in your own communities,
yes,
1 in 2 people are being abused, realistically.
By abuse rates by parents, by, again, church leaders in Tim Ballard's own church, where his the law firm defending him, which also defends the church, has a regular policy. I just can't. This is so
OUR basically
wild.
Just tried to dismiss it as nothing. And that's basically the rebuke from Paul and OUR is like, this is a non-issue. But it's like, if it's such a non-issue, then why were you yourself freaking out about it in the footage that you thought had been destroyed? Why were you worried about getting in trouble with the Mexican authorities if you had a sworn affidavit that she was 16? Also, even 18, and also, even if she fucking was 18, why did you put your hands on her boobs? You did not need to do that. And why did you lie and say that the other guy put your hand on her boobs? That clearly didn't happen based on the evidence we have available to us.
And again, this is all being done with the tacit endorsement of the LDS Church, because they're saying, well, Elder Ballard has endorsed all of this, and they recognize that as fighters of trafficking, we have to sometimes do things that we wouldn't do otherwise. Our Sensonas do it for us, thankfully. This is just all so telling.
Yeah.
We gotta go to the strip club. We gotta get drunk. We gotta get lap dances. Otherwise they won't believe us.
Yeah.
You gotta shower with me. You gotta sleep in bed. You gotta have sex with me. That's the only way the traffickers will believe us.
He didn't show an ounce of ickiness about having done it. It was only fear of getting in trouble. Whether she's 16 or 18, I don't care. Either way, you believe that this girl is a trafficking victim, so you should be horrified that you just touched her boobs. And she clearly didn't like it because she pushed you away. So you should be horrified by the fact that you just did that. But you didn't. You laughed about it. You all laughed about it in your little boys club of unqualified, completely not trauma-informed approaches.
Because, again, they're using actual children as bait for entrapment schemes.
Again, there's a reason that these men are attracted to these fucking schemes. And, again, they come up with the method. No expert in the anti-trafficking field is recommending that this is how you fight human trafficking. Not the experts at the UN, not the people who have, researched it their entire lives. No one. Just a bunch of, guys from a pedophilic purity culture are rolling in and we'll go to the strip. We're like, ugh.
So fucking wild. And the crazy thing is, at any point, any of these people involved, especially Tim Ballard, could have been like, hey, you know what? I messed up.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'll do better.
I panicked. Or it wasn't like
Never.
that, though.
It's the whole time you're a bitch, you're liars, you're pedophiles, which is such an indicator to me. Every mature person can acknowledge that's what a good person isn't somebody who's never messed up. I've said this before. A good person is not somebody who's never done wrong. A good person is someone who does wrong and can acknowledge and learn from it, right? So if you're this is all just an attempt to do what they can, and they're not perfect, and they're pioneering, and they'll make mistakes, and we'll learn from him. They haven't shown any remorse at any step along the way. They've constantly vilified people who have raised very legitimate concerns, have tried to defame and denounce those who are speaking out. They've got everybody involved under NDA so that nobody can speak. It's a classic case of cover-up and rampant abuse, misappropriation of funds, misappropriation of trust, it's just bad all the way down. And he shows no conscious willingness to grapple with this in any reasonable, healthy way. It's always everybody's lying. They're taking everything out of context, even when he's shown to be lying.
And the fact that they claim their reason for doing all this is because they want to save children, minors, from sexual exploitation. But after he engaged in sexual exploitation, we have the audio recording of where his mind went to immediately following that. And then when thinking about the incident later on, there wasn't anything in there about that poor girl. There wasn't one sentiment uttered that was about like her plight. Even when referring to her boobs, you like objectified her by being like, those are 60, you know what I mean? There's like this weird like objectifying language, and even the way he talked about that. Again, these are the last people in the world who should be engaged in this kind of work. Like they are so clearly just wanting to like go to strip clubs and play action heroes and like obvious point.
I have until now been pretty like, I don't want to assume the worst. I don't want to assume that bad things are being done under the guise. I want to believe that it's just mistakes that they're learning from. But
I just think when the CEO calls a woman a bitch, who's an expert in the field, he claims he started an organization. That was like the first. I mean, there's been a million red, but like as soon as I heard that, like that's the founder of this fucking organization called a woman a bitch, and you expect me to be like on your team about your work, like solving exploitation of women and girls? Absolutely not. Like it. Ugh.
I was just again listening to a Lynn Packer report on Tim and the origin story that Sound of Freedom is based off of, which again
is a lie,
is certifiably false, because they've compared court records of the care facility that the boy he rescued was staying in.
There was no shipping container involved.
Yeah, there's so many things.
It's just an emotionally compelling movie.
And rather than being like, oh, I misspoke. Because I get the trouble of like speaking extemporaneously, recounting events that happened years before, and you know, I see the way that even, you know, like the way I talk about things may change from one situation to another. But if someone was like, hey, that was inconsistent, I'd be like, oh yeah, shit, sorry, I misspoke. I wouldn't double down and create new lies unless there was something you didn't want exposed in the first place, which is now all coming to light. And I think it's only going to get worse. I feel like this is the stuff that has only been able to been acknowledged. And we're not even getting the stuff that's under NDA, under stuff that the church doesn't want.
They definitely
put out there.
More. Yeah,
it's pretty wild, and he's just getting more and more agitated, more and more politically divisive, and
it's scary.
Yeah, it's pretty spooky. He's a paramilitary fraud. Like that should be a huge concern to everybody.
I know I've belabored this point, but if you were in that situation and a trafficker had put your hand on a 16 or 18-year-old girl's boob, you probably would have walked away from that interaction
as
crying.
Our friend did.
You would have cried.
The person we interviewed who we're close to now.
That's really
exactly what he did. He saw that and he was like, I'm out of here.
You can so tell that these men are not like emotionally affected by this the way that you would hope they are. I haven't been this upset since our last Tim Ballard video, and we were committed to not doing any more Tim Ballard videos. Because it's so harrowing making a video where you criticize this kind of stuff because you do give a shit, and then you have a million people in the comments calling you a pedophile for like daring to suggest that this kind of shit is wrong. And this is exactly the kind of shit, like we didn't know about this story when we did our last video, but everything, all the pieces we did know, this is exactly what I was imagining. Everything that's come out since we did our last video is exactly in line with what my gut was telling me was true based on what we knew from our last video. Which is horrifying because my gut is also telling me that there's a lot more dark shit that we don't know about yet.
It's going to be an interesting time to see how this all plays out. Will Tim get more aggro against the LDS Church? Will he receive disciplinary action? Will the ultra-right conservative faction continue to distance itself from the LDS Church? How do they recover from this?
I'd be surprised if they excommunicated him based on what we know so far.
If he keeps seeking a run for Senate and keeps saying the church is lying. But they can't
excommunicate him for... But I feel like at this point they're a bit more cautious with who they excommunicate because... Because
of this?
Yeah.
They don't want a paramilitary insurrection.
Yeah, but I just don't think they'll excommunicate him.
Yeah, maybe not. That's why I'm wondering if how this is all.
I wonder if his campaign will have any legs. It seems like based on the reactions from Mormons who are normally diehard with the church on everything, it seems like his campaign might have legs, which is horrifying. But it is of some comfort to me that the church has spoken out because obviously they are a political powerhouse in Utah.
Yeah, though not carrying the same weight they used to among Mormons, it's interesting to see how many people are willing to believe Tim Ballard over the church.
But I wonder if, like, when all is said and done, like, outside of actual influence over, like, Utah Mormon voters, they've been interwoven with the hierarchies of like Utah's powerful for a lot longer than Tim Ballard.
Yeah.
So I could imagine them.
Yeah.
It's going to reflect really badly on them. Like Mitt Romney, on the whole, is like a pretty good representative for the Mormon Church, you know? Like he's had his shit in his time. But, you know, like they're conservative. He's conservative. He's not conservative in a way that is overtly offensive relative to what, you know, is these days.
It's so funny. Again, we could do a whole Mitt Romney video and probably should, but I remember when he was the Republican nominee for president, and I, a Rexburg College Republican and libertarian at the time, was like, Mitt Romney is too far right. He's a war hawk. He's in bed with the most rabid factions of the Republican Party. He's appeasing them, and I want nothing to do with it. I didn't vote for him. Now the poetic irony of being like, he's the only thing, like this is
he's the
kind of
white
what
knight.
You yeah, like
the white
seeing
knight
him stand up
prophecy
to
is
Trump
coming true.
and stuff, and
Although he only voted that like Trump did one of the two things wrong in that. I don't remember what it even was these days, but he even was like conservative in his rebuking of Trump. Like he by no means was like out the gate like fuck Trump. Like he still was not what we would hope for from like a man with integrity. And yet,
even if I disagree with someone, I can respect principles. I would love to see like a debate between Ron Paul and Bernie Sanders, because even though they're ideological opposites, I feel like they're both really principled people, and would love to hear that kind of discussion. I feel like Mitt Romney is a similar way. I disagree with him on a lot, but I can at least respect that he's a man of scruples. Whether I agree with the... I know, me too. Yeah, anyway, that's a whole other can of worms that we'll get into another day.
Yeah.
How you feeling?
I guess just my closing thought, not that I think we'll be able to like impact anyone who's not already on our side by this point, but it's just coming back to that same sentiment of like, if you claim to care about something, but your ability to care ends the minute your ego is implicated, aka your current worldview is challenged, or the people that you look up to as heroes are criticized in legitimate ways, then I just don't think you can really claim to care about that thing. Like, you care about it to such an ineffective, shallow level so as to almost be useless. Because I feel like that all of the evils of our world do seem to come down to unconsciousness and people not being willing to challenge the way that they are, or to have the ways that they are just sort of like fundamentally wired or, are inclined to think challenged. And so if we cannot, challenge our own worldviews, we're no better than the people that have rigid worldviews that are harmful. Because it's like the reason the world does not get better is because people are not willing to let their egos take a hit. And I get it, because it's evolution, so it's not like people are necessarily choosing that. It's just like all of us are wired to protect our deeply held beliefs at all costs. And if you went to the Sound of Freedom movie and you had a really emotionally powerful experience watching that movie, I can understand why it would be very difficult to then like disentangle that from, like loving Tim Ballard or OUR or Sound of Freedom, even when new evidence, like that's the name of the game, right? When new evidence comes to light, like our brains are just wired to do everything they can to push that new evidence away because we've had such an emotionally powerful experience initially.
Because it forces you to deconstruct in order to understand the mechanisms that create those strong emotional experiences that you have and that has been for you connected with spiritual truth. As you said, morality from childhood onward is largely conditioned to be a matter of in-group affiliation, that our team is good and outsiders are dangerous, especially in really high-control groups like the LDS Church, for instance, where we're the elect, we're the one true church, this kind of stuff. It's so easy to see how it thrives. And why Utah, again, is the capital for affinity fraud, and the second state, Florida, is not even close.
Yeah, and that's...
Which is telling you something.
It really scares me how much right-wing extremists are using children as pawns in their scheme, because anyone can get up and say the other side is... I mean, didn't the Nazis accuse...
I was going to say, this is the oldest scheme in the book, especially for Christians who have been leveraging it against Jews since, the beginning.
Right.
Jews killed Christ, Jews are coming to steal your children, they're gay, they're going to turn your children gay, they're going to, that was what led up to the Holocaust. They're still doing that today.
It's just the easiest way to try and attack someone who's criticizing you, is to just be like, they're a pedophile. Because that's the worst thing any of us can think of most of the time. So it's scary because I think a lot of well-intentioned people are inclined to be like, well, these are the people talking about the issue. And so, you know, like they mean well, but then they end up supporting these people who ultimately are harming children, who are taking away their free lunches, who are creating the kind of economic desperation that drives teens to go into sex trafficking and all this stuff, you know? So that's just what's scary is it's been used throughout the generations for a reason. Like, it is effective. And we're not like Democrats, so to speak, or, you know, claiming that like the left has got it down or anything, but it's like a lot of leftist policies are the kinds of policies that will improve economic conditions and actually make life better for kids. But then the right has, and again, we're not trying to do an us versus them thing, but then the right will just be like, they're pedophiles. And then they don't have to really do anything to back it up. And even when there's evidence that goes against that, it's just like people are susceptible to just like swallowing narratives that people say. Like Trump. I mean, Trump is like a known sexual abuser of minors.
Bragged about it.
And women, yeah. And it's kids as well. I mean, it's minors. It's not just of age consensual women by any means. And yet he's the first person that will get up and be like, the Democrats are pedophiles.
Who will be on Tim Ballard's
100%.
podcast saying, this is why we got to build a wall.
Yeah, so that's what's scary. Again, I hope that this Sound of Freedom thing like prompts people to like really think about the fact that just because someone claims to care about something does not mean that they do. And when evidence comes to light that says that they actually are like part of the problem, we should...
It's easy to think the problem is out there. It's these wicked, evil, conniving, conspiring people versus the nice neighbor, local chiropractor or dentist who helped me fix my roof. So he could, that couldn't be him. He's a nice guy. He's been a Boy Scout master for 12 years. He couldn't have abused anybody. Oh my God, we haven't even talked about Scouts honor.
A friend who I respect, like, knows Tim Ballard personally, and she described him as like lovely, like a great dad, really nice guy.
I've interviewed people who are like, he's a great dad, super good.
He probably is on many levels. And he has sexually harassed at least 7 women and called a woman a bitch who's an expert in his field for, we need
and
to
that wasn't
start
him
being
saying,
able to hold
I'm
these
going to
things.
create an organization where I can lure women into sleeping with me sexually. It's
That's
all
the thing.
unconscious.
That's why it's so telling. Sorry, this is getting so long, but that's why it's so telling that, like, sort of the QAnon conspiracies, like these extreme right-wing conspiracies are all about, like, there's this concerted effort of everyone's getting together and they have this like shared goal of promoting pedophilia. And it's like, no, the corruption is in plain sight.
Like PedCon meets once a year to establish the agenda.
Like they can, because they are unconscious of what evil actually looks like, because a lot of it is in them.
Just unconsciousness.
They can't
generally.
really conceptualize evil outside of this idea that there's this like scheme that everyone's in on, instead of just like, no, it's these systems that are just like perpetuating power dynamics.
And I'm sure there are schemes of conscious maldoers, like,
well, yeah, human
big
trafficking
world.
is real. But it's like Hillary Clinton's not having like secret meetings
children.
with other Satanists and like extracting adrenochrome. She's like at home reading a fucking murdering mystery novel probably, and then like raking in money from lobbying. I don't know. We're not. Yeah, we can
Clinton apologists either.
Yeah, we're not.
It's all fucked, and the grifter industrial complex is crumbling, and may it continue to crumble. It is interesting when you just get enough contradictions and people all leveraging each other's names to get their own credibility, and then watching that just fall apart. There's a certain schadenfreude to it that can't be denied.
Humans, we want to believe that things are like simple and understandable, and we've talked about this before, but it's like very scary for us humans to accept that like the world is unknowable and confusing and unpredictable. So all these like cognitive biases that keep people like dismissing evidence that, oh, you are as bad and all this, like, are super understandable. But we have to start... Where was I going with that? I don't know. Just we have to start being able to hold 2 things at once. And it's like everyone good is also bad,
Capable, or at least
like
capable of it.
We all contain good and bad, yeah.
Yeah. And, I mean, I was
And instead of insisting that you and the people that you look up to are all good and everyone who's not part of that your groups are all bad.
And everyone who criticizes your group or members of your group.
Once we can get away from that like juvenile, like non-real way of like understanding reality, and we can be like, we all have the capacity to do bad when certain things are triggered. Obviously, like we've each had different life experiences that like some people are realistically never going to feel any kind of inclination to abuse children, right? But some people, they are, through no fault of their own. That's just been conditioned into them. And like we've all just got to be aware of like what our shit is and what our shadow side is. And, you know, it's just being able to like embrace everything about us without shame, but like while taking responsibility for the ways you act it out is so important. And you can like see that the fucking men in this kind of story are not doing that. We should end. This is so long. Please will you support us on Patreon if you appreciate us making videos like this. We rely on Patreon to be able to keep the channel going, and we lose donors every month, so we rely on new people subscribing every month. And it's fun over there. We read 80s Mormon fiction, and it's a good time.
Much lighter than this.
It is lighter, although still,
It's crazy that Tim now is claiming to be silenced because people aren't seeing the movie, or because they're.
Were you silent or were you silenced?
Is this an Onion headline like? Man tells 2 million podcast listeners that he's being silenced.
I know. I know.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Love you guys.